If you saw my video at the beginning of the year, you know that I am crocheting a book blanket this year. So every time that I finish a new book, I'll be crocheting a number of rows for that book based on how long it is. And then for the genre, it'll be getting a different color. This is my little key. If you want to learn more about the entire philosophy and strategy behind the blanket, I have a whole video on that I posted that I will link to in the description. But I'm also going to be posting videos like this one at the end of every single month, where every time that I finish a new book, I crochet the rows for that book and talk a little bit about the book and whether I liked it or not, what are my thoughts. And so this is that video for January. I read 14 books in the month of January, so this is what my book blanket is looking like so far, and I am absolutely obsessed with it. As you can see, I was reading mostly fantasy, romance, and YA, and then I got a little bit of graphic novel in at the end, and I also had some nonfiction books more towards the beginning of the month. But I, in general, had a really good reading month. I had a good time, and yeah, let's go ahead and dive right on in, and you can watch me crochet these rows. Alright, so I have officially finished my first book of the year, and it was The Bear, the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, which is a fantasy book. So it's going to be this gold color here. I read the audiobook for this book, but the print version of it is 322 pages. So looking at my little cheat sheet here, that means that I am going to do 2 rows of moss stitch of my blanket in the gold color for this book. So obviously I've already done my first couple of rows in my white base color, and now I'm going to be switching over to the gold color for my fantasy book and chatting to you a little bit about this book that I read. So The Bear and the Nightingale is based on old Russian folklore, and it's set in a really remote Russian village and follows a girl called Vasya, who is the son of a local lord, and she sort of grows up listening to her nanny telling stories about all of the local spirits, and especially about the frost spirit. And her mother passed away when she was really young, I think basically when she was born, if I remember correctly. And her father doesn't remarry for a really long time until she's about 7, at which point he goes to Moscow to meet with his half-brother-in-law, who is the current czar, and he goes to bring back a wife for himself and also to make matches for his oldest children. And in the end, he marries the Tsar's oldest daughter, who is thought to be kind of insane. She sees devils and stuff like that. And what she doesn't realize, of course, is that the devils that she sees are just these house spirits and things like that are what Vasya's nanny has been telling her about this whole time. And Vasya can see these house spirits too. Not everyone can see them, but she can. And so when her new stepmother, Anna, comes back, and she believes that these spirits are devils and demons, she thinks that her youngest stepmother, or her stepdaughter, is also, worshipping demons and stuff like that. And sort of as time goes on, we're introduced to some new characters. There's a priest that comes and really turns the village into a very Christian place. They start to reject the old gods, and Vasya learns that the old gods are starving and dying, really. And so she takes it upon herself to take care of them. But again, sort of as her stepmother finds this out, she thinks that Vasya is a devil child and wants to send her away. And so from there, Vasya needs to figure out okay, how could she not be sent away, blah, blah, blah. And that's sort of where the story really picks up. This is the first book in a trilogy, and so it's really a lot of introduction. It goes over the first probably 16 years or so of Vasya's life. I'm not sure exactly how old she is in the bulk of the story, but it's very much sort of almost a generational tale in a way. It goes over a long period of time, and so it does feel a little bit slow to start with, but I suspect that in the second and third books, the action is really going to pick up, because a lot of first books in sort of a trilogy or in a series, it's a lot of world building and all of that sort of stuff. But I would say it's a really, really good winter read. It's very atmospheric. I loved learning about the Russian folklore, and I thought it was just a fun and cozy read, even if it's got a little bit of spooky, scary stuff at the end as well. And yeah, I thought it was a fun read, and I'm excited to dive into the second book, which is actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to listen to the audiobook while I finish up my 2 rows for the first one. All right, so I have finished my 2 rows for the book as well as 1 divider row, so I'm ready for the next book when I finish that one. And this is what it looks like so far. All right, I've officially finished another 2 books since the last time I crocheted in my blanket. The first one of those was Gideon the Ninth by Muir. It is a sci-fi fantasy book, and it was 556 pages, so I am going to crochet 3 rows in this gold color while I chat to you about it. So Harrow the Ninth is the second book in the Locked Tomb series that started off with Gideon the Ninth. And I'm going to try to keep this like as spoiler free as I possibly can, but keeping in mind that this is the second book in a series, so I would say if you haven't read Gideon the Ninth yet, maybe skip over this part. I should have chapter times stamped so you can just skip to the next book. Harrow the Ninth picks up sometime after Gideon the Ninth finishes, and very interestingly, it starts off in second person, and Harrow is now on the Emperor's spaceship. She's become a lictor, but there's really no evidence of Gideon to be found, which is not, I think, what I expected going into this book after the first one. I certainly expected there to be Gideon's voice hanging around there. So it starts off in second person, and Harrow is in the spaceship, and you're like, what's going on here? That feels wrong. And you really kind of get this just like feeling that something is wrong from the beginning. And as Harrow starts to kind of go into her lictorial training, we get to know these other lictors, we get to know the Emperor. Everything just feels off, and I think the way that it's written in second person really, really helps with that, in just like making it feel weird. I would say that my experience with reading the Locked Tomb series so far has been that I don't know what's going on probably 80% of the time, and I think that was even more so the case with Harrow the Ninth. It was definitely written to be that way, but I don't know if I feel like I'm smart enough for that, or if I really have like the mental energy to do that constantly, which is why I didn't go straight into reading Harrow the Ninth after I read Gideon the Ninth a couple of months ago, and why after reading Harrow the Ninth I decided to then take a big old brain break and read a really silly romance book. I do think I won't take as long in between Harrow and Nona the Ninth as I did between Gideon and Harrow, but like I think I'll start it soonish, but for now taking a little brain break because I just like don't know what's going on half the time. But that being said, even though I don't know what's going on half the time, I do still have a good time, especially as things pick up. I think this was the case with both Gideon and with Harrow the Ninth, where like the first half of the book or so is a little bit repetitive. It's a little bit boring almost, and very confusing. But once you start to figure things out and like action starts happening, it gets really exciting. And I think I'm starting to like have a better understanding of the world that we're in. So I am really excited for Nona the Ninth. I think it's going to be a fun time. That being said, Nona the Ninth could also be equally as confusing. I don't know. There's truly no way to know. But I think in general, I'm still having a good time with the series. It's not like my favorite series in the world because it is so confusing, but I know for some people like that's what they really love about it. So I guess it just kind of depends on like how you like your books, whether you're going to like these books or not. I feel like I'm not going to truly be able to make a judgment on them until I finish the series. So we'll see. So I finished up those 3 rows plus my divider row, and now it is time to move on to the next book that I finished. The next book that I finished was Eye Candy by Esme. It was a contemporary romance book, and it was 283 pages. So I'm going to be doing 2 rows in the baby pink color. This is the first time that I'm using another color besides gold, because the first 2 books that I read this year were both fantasy books, so I am very intrigued to start to see some of my color combination happening. So after reading Harrow the Ninth, I definitely felt like I needed a little bit of a palette cleanser, a book where I could just kind of turn my brain off for a little bit. Eye Candy definitely delivered. This is a story about a girl named Caroline who is a burlesque dancer. She's originally from New Zealand, and she moved to New York to pursue her burlesque career, but it's not going super well. She's kind of down on her luck. She's having a lot of trouble booking shows or booking a spot at any like burlesque club. And so when she's presented with the opportunity to impersonate this like rich heiress that she looks a lot like in order to make a guy look bad, she takes the chance because they're gonna pay her like $20,000. And honestly, if you wouldn't do that, I don't know. And the heiress that she's impersonating is this guy's ex. But when she gets to the party and starts to embarrass him, she meets his older brother, his older half brother as well. And he is very hot in like a sexy professor way. Like sweaters, glasses, all of that sort of stuff. And his name is Chase, if I'm remembering correctly. And he is an ethics blogger. Like that's what he does in his free time because he is very rich and doesn't actually need to work that much. And he figures out pretty quickly that Caroline is not the person that she is pretending to be, which is good because he's realized that he is also very attracted to her and they have insane chemistry. And so the book kind of goes from there as they figure things out. I will say that looking at the cover of this book and also reading the description, I thought that it was going to be like a lot spicier than it was. There was still like a decent amount of spice and it was like pretty well written, but I was kind of expecting more, but I still thought that it was a fun little read. It wasn't like my favorite romance book of all time or anything. It was pretty ridiculous, but in the best way, and it was like exactly what I was looking for this moment in time in my reading. So I did enjoy it, but I think in the end I would probably rate it like 3.5 stars. I'm trying to also be like more strict in my star rating this year because usually I'm like, if the book is halfway decent, I'll rate it 4 stars, which is just like not how I should be rating my books, because then I look back at all of them and I'm like, this book isn't a 4-star book, like why did I rate it 4 stars? So I'm trying to be a little bit more strict with my ratings this year. So I would say, yeah, probably more of a 3-star read for this one, but it was still a good time. All right, so this is how it's looking like with those rows done. I think I am a fan of how it is starting to look with another color, and I will be back when I finish another book. All right, I have finished another book. This time that book is The Message by Ta-Nehisi. This is a nonfiction book, so it will be getting its rows in this deep teal color. And this book is officially 235 pages long. However, it is like shorter than a normal book, and the font itself is also like decently big. So I feel like in reality, also with just like how quickly I read it, it was more of a 1-row book than a 2-row book, which is what I would normally do for a book that's between 200 and 400 pages. So I'm going to give it 1 row in the deep teal color. So this is actually my first book by Ta-Nehisi that I've read. And I have to say that I went into it with both really high expectations and really low expectations in a way. I went into it with really high expectations because I know that he's a really acclaimed writer and that people have felt really moved by his previous works. But I went into it with low expectations because I knew that one of the reasons people were kind of freaking out about the book was that it touched on Palestine. And like going into it, what I knew was that he had previously kind of talked favorably about Israel, and that this book was then talking about his trip to Israel and Palestine and how that changed his views. So like I didn't go in expecting to learn anything new. I kind of went in expecting like pretty stock standard stuff when it comes to like, oh, I just learned about this terrible thing, which is a good thing, right? Like that's needed. So I went into it, and especially going into that section, feeling a little skeptical and worried and probably not expecting anything like super groundbreaking. The book itself is written as a series of 3 essays / kind of like letters addressed to a group of students at Howard University that he taught a few years ago. The first 2 essays are pretty short, and the first one is especially, I think it's only like 30 pages or something like that. And then the last one, which is the one on Palestine, is like 150 pages. The first one talks about a trip to Senegal that he took. It was his first trip to Africa, and it kind of just talks a little bit about like feeling a little weird, feeling out of place, and like the feelings that it evoked in him. The second essay then is about a trip that he took to a school board meeting in South Carolina where they were trying to ban his book, and it talks about the one meeting that he went to and the like actual overwhelming support that he got in that one meeting. So that's like a little bit heartwarming tale. It talks about like how there are in fact people fighting back against book banning, which is nice to read about. And then the third essay is the longest one, and it's about his trip to Palestine and sort of his impressions and how he like learned and came to reevaluate what he thought on the issue. And I actually finished this book a few days ago and have kind of been sitting on it because I still don't really know how I feel about it. I think that like I always and forever want to celebrate and accept people who change their views on things in favor of Palestine. Like I always think that that's a good thing, and like we should not necessarily be saying like, oh, what took you so long, like you suck because it took you this long to figure this stuff out. Like that's not the vibe. However, I struggled, I think, with the way he went about this, because the reason that people were really skeptical about him when it came to Israel-Palestine is because he wrote like this specific essay in, I think, The Atlantic that was about reparations. And I haven't actually read this essay, but I think essentially it like compared Israel and the success of Israel and that as reparations to like reparations for Black folks in the US. But I feel like the fact that I can't actually tell you what he said in this essay is a problem, because he talks multiple times about this essay and about like how he wrote it with the best intentions, blah blah blah, but he never goes into detail about what the content of that essay was and like what specifically was wrong with how he wrote it. So you really have to have read that essay in order to like, I think, fully comprehend what he's talking about there, and I don't think that that's like a good way to go about writing something like this. I think you need to lay out like specifically what you said that was wrong. And at the same time, it kind of felt like it was addressed at people who had read this essay and found problem with it when the rest of the book is supposed to be addressed to his students. And so that just kind of like felt like a narrative glitch almost. As far as like the actual content of him talking about Palestine, like it was pretty stock standard. Like these are the horrors that Palestinian folks undergo in their ongoing occupation. I don't necessarily think that like I learned anything new, but that's because I've read like an extensive amount of Palestinian literature. I organize for Palestine with Palestinian folks. Like this is something that I'm incredibly well versed on, but I do think if it's something that you haven't read a lot on, you might get more out of it. But at the same time, like if you're looking to read and learn about Palestine, there's other books that I would direct you to first over those. And I really want to do at some point a good recommendation video about books by Palestinian authors that you should be reading. So definitely keep an eye out for that one. I think I'm going to try to prioritize that as I'm trying to get content onto my new booktube channel. So yeah, I'm still just kind of like sitting with how I feel about the book as a whole. I think that Ta-Nehisi Coates is a really good author and I would read more works by him, but I think this one just didn't hit in quite the way that I was hoping that it would. But I think it's hit for other people, so like that's good. But yeah, I don't know, it just wasn't quite the most amazing thing, and I am glad that I grabbed it from the library because I don't think it's something that I would want to have spent $30 on and keep on my shelf. Alright, and we're done with this row now, so this is what we're working with now, and I will see you when I finish another book. I've finished 2 more books, so let's go ahead and crochet the rows for those. The first book that I finished was Better Than Revenge by Kasie West. This was a YA romance, so it is going to get this pink color, which is for all of my YA books. The book itself was 320 pages, so it's going to get 2 rows, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the book while I crochet those rows. So I received this book as an e-arc from NetGalley, and as per usual, I'm a little bit behind in my NetGalley reading. A little bit is perhaps an understatement, but this one came out, I believe, on the 31st of December. And so just a little bit behind on this one. And it is so cute and fun. I think that this book was like the quintessential YA romance in that it's got like a slightly ridiculous premise, but it's the kind of ridiculous premise that works really well in YA. It was so cute. I loved the chemistry between our main character and her love interest, and yeah, it was really good. So Better Than Revenge follows Finley, who is a high school junior, and her like big dream that she's been working towards since like forever is to be on the school's podcasting team, and specifically to be one of the on-air podcasters on the school's podcasting team. And on the day that auditions are happening for next year's podcasting team, which is done always by seniors, she auditions, and right as she comes out of the audition, her boyfriend, who was like supposedly waiting there in line with her to support her, goes, "You know what? I think I'm gonna try out too." And her boyfriend is like not the kind of person who would try out for podcasting, has never expressed interest in it, despite like helping her with coming up with ideas for the audition and all of that sort of stuff. He's a football player, like it's just not his thing. And so it's totally shocking to her that he just like randomly on a whim decides to try out for the podcasting team, and it's obviously a betrayal. And as we come to find out a little bit later, after the podcasting team is announced and it turns out he's one of the on-air podcasters, and you know, he most likely stole Finley's spot in that, because she doesn't become one, she just becomes a researcher for the podcast, that he stole one of her ideas and auditioned with that. So obviously, after this goes down, Finley breaks up with him via text because he doesn't deserve more than that, and she and her friends decide to come up with different ways to get revenge on him. At first, it's like pretty basic, petty revenge stuff, you know, write his number on the stall in the men's restroom, stuff like that. But when they're at a party that's being thrown by his like arch rival, fellow kicker on the football team, who's always been first string, and Jensen, which is the ex-boyfriend, has been like behind him. Like some of the guys are kicking around a ball, and it like goes off to the side towards where Finley is, and she kicks it back to them. And then Teo, who's the person who's the party's house is at and who's the sort of arch rival of her ex-boyfriend, is like, "Whoa, you can kick pretty good," because she used to play soccer. And they basically come up with a plan where he will teach her how to be a kicker, and she'll try out and take her ex's spot away from him on the football team. And so they start training together, and obviously they've got crazy chemistry, and things go from there. There's also a really sweet sort of side story where Finley is interviewing her grandma for a podcast, doing a podcast based on like her grandma's life story. Because her grandma has Alzheimer's, so she's kind of recording her grandmother's stories before her memory goes completely. And one thing that comes to light is that she had this like young love who became a famous painter, and his first painting on a surfboard, which is what he's famous for, was for her. And so then they are, you know, trying to find this surfboard because it's been lost over the years and all of that sort of stuff. So it's a really fun little sweet side story. And all in all, just like the whole book is super sweet. I am obsessed with Teo, who is our love interest. He's kind of like on the outside looks like a, you know, guy who's too cocky for his own good, but actually he's very sweet and has low-key really liked Finley for a really long time, and their relationship is sweet as sort of he comes to help her step into her own power a little bit more. So we love to see that. I thought this was just like the perfect YA romance, because things like having like trying to get revenge on your ex in this really ridiculous way don't work often in adult romance novels, because it's just like no one really does this. But when it's like kids in high school, it's like, yeah, people like kids in high school kind of do this stuff. So it's so much fun. It felt like watching like a bad teen TV show. I had a really great time with this one. All right, so this is what the blanket is looking like after those rows. And now let's get into the second book that I recently finished. The second book that I finished was called Queer as Folklore by Sacha, and it was a nonfiction book, so it's going to be in this deep teal color again. It was 346 pages, so it's going to get 2 rows of crochet and moss stitch, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the book as I do those. So Queer as Folklore is a nonfiction book, obviously, and it talks about various different folklore and sort of the history of those folklore and their ties to queerness. It's a really interesting sort of concept for a book, and I was really looking forward to it going into it. I read this kind of over the course of a month and sort of read like a section at a time. So it was a little bit slow going. In general, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was super interesting. I loved learning about different kinds of folklore and the different ways that like my community has seen themselves in these different folklores throughout history. I do feel like it was a little bit skin deep though, in the sense that like it really was an overview of thousands of years of history and thousands of years of folklore, and so you only really got like tiny snippets of each of these things. And I kind of wish it had maybe been able to go into them more deeply. I don't think that's really something that you can do with the length of the book if you want to cover like all of these different areas, because we go from everything from like unicorns and mermaids to modern day superheroes. So it really covers like a really wide breadth of different types of folklore. So it wasn't able to go as in depth as it could have, which I thought was too bad. I would have enjoyed a little bit more depth, but I don't think that's really what the book was aiming for. But yeah, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was a fun time. And I would probably read more from this author if he ever publishes like more in-depth stuff. I would be interested in that for sure. All right, and this is what we are looking like after I finished those rows. I will be back after I finish another book. I have finished 6 additional books since the last time I worked on my crochet book blanket, which means I have got some catching up to do. So let's go ahead and dive right on in and start talking about some of these books. The first of those 6 books that I finished was Nona the Ninth, which was a sci-fi book. So it will be getting this gold color, and it was 511 pages, so it will be getting 3 rows total. So Nona the Ninth is the 3rd book in the Locked Tomb series by Tamsyn Muir. I read the 2nd book of the series earlier this month. So again, if you haven't read the books before this book in the series, I'm going to try my best to avoid spoilers, but maybe skip this one for now. Nona the Ninth is interesting because it is by far, so far, the character that has the least idea of what is going on, which if you know how the first 2 books in the series go, that's kind of like the whole thing, is that the character who is our main POV character has no idea what was going on. But in this one, Nona is someone who basically came into being 6 months ago in a body that is not hers, and no one really knows who she is. She doesn't know who she is. And she's living with 3 people, Calamities, Camilla, and Pyrrha, who are kind of like her caretakers slash parents, make sure that she's okay. She has a job as like a teaching assistant at a school, but she's basically another one of the kids. And they're living in sort of this like post-apocalyptic sci-fi type town situation. And so for most of the book, we kind of just like follow her on her adventures and her little quirkiness, which is really fun. She is like absolutely the most charming human being alive. And then as the book goes on, you know, she still doesn't really know who she is, but we start to maybe figure out who she is, and we get more back into like the plot of the series as well, start to figure some more stuff out. And so I think despite the fact that this is the book where the POV main character has the least idea of what was going on, this was the moment where I maybe finally started to figure out what was going on. I'm still not even 60% sure of what's happening in this series, but I'm along for the ride at this point. There's only 1 book left, so we will see if at the end of it all, I know what's happening. But this one was a fun read, and again, tandem reading it was just a joy. The narration is just so well done in the audiobook, but it's definitely not one that I would read just the audiobook, because I can tell you that for sure if I had no idea what was going on with the physical book in front of my face the whole time, there's no way in heck that I would have known what was going on just reading the audiobook. So definitely recommend reading this at a minimum with your eyes, if not with both your eyes and your ears. All right, first book down, let's move on to the second one. The next book that I read was The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden, which was the 2nd book in the Winter Night trilogy. The first book was The Bear and the Nightingale, which I read earlier this month, and that is a fantasy book, so it'll be getting gold and 2 rows of it because it was 384 pages. So again, because this is the 2nd book in a series, I'm going to be trying to keep it as spoiler-free as possible, but if you really don't want any spoilers for what happens after the first book, then I would skip this section. So The Girl in the Tower starts basically right after the events of Bear and the Nightingale, with Vasya fleeing her hometown, and she sort of starts traveling with her horse. The first part of the book is really just following her adventures, her like sort of turning into this hero. She comes across a village that's been attacked by the Tatars, and a couple of the young girls in the village were kidnapped by them, and so she takes it upon herself to go find and rescue them which she does successfully. And after that, she eventually runs into her brother, the priest, and they make their way to Moscow, where she also runs into her sister. Now, this whole time, she has been disguised as a boy. Obviously, her siblings know that she is not a boy, but they keep her secret for her. So from there, Vasya has to learn kind of like how to navigate the world that is so different from the one that she knew back home, and also how to navigate a world that's different because she's navigating the world as a different gender as what she's always navigated the world as. Obviously, there's some courtly drama and chaos and catastrophe, and the third book is definitely set up for being a little bit crazy. So in the end, I was definitely right that, like, although the first book was slow, the second book would be much more action-packed. I don't think it suffered from second book syndrome, probably because it's a trilogy, so you don't really have any of that like fluffy padding that you need to get in there in a second book, and I had a really good time reading it. Alright, done with that. The next book that I finished was The Name Drop by Susan Lee, which is a YA romance, so it's going to be in this hot pink color, and the book was 299 pages long, so it is going to be 2 rows. I picked this book up while I was at Love Y'all Festival last year because Susan Lee was like the loveliest human being ever. She was handing out watermelon pins to show your support for Palestine, which a year ago now was still kind of a radical thing to be doing. I mean, it's still a radical thing to be doing, but it's even more so back then. So that like immediately, obviously, endeared me to her, and I had to buy one of her books. But I'm only just getting around to reading it now because I was like looking at all of the books that I bought at Love Y'all Festival and all of the books by authors that are going to be at the festival this year that I haven't read yet. And I was like, oh gosh, I got some reading to do. So I picked this one up and I read it on the plane and while I was in Florida with my family last weekend. And this book is just like such a delight. It's so cute. It follows our 2 main characters who are both interning for the summer at a Korean company in New York City. The FMC is the daughter of like sort of a lower ranked person in the company and got into the internship program of her own merit. And the MMC is the son of the CEO of the company, like the owner of the company, and is supposed to be taking part in this like executive training program, like special internship. But it turns out that the 2 of them have the same Korean name, and so they get mixed up, and our girl gets put into the executive training program instead of the regular intern program, and he gets put into the regular intern program instead of the executive intern program, which also comes with the fact that like he is living with all of the other interns, 12 to 1 apartment, and she's living in this like lovely, very expensive and fancy townhouse. And they could, you know, like just be like, hey, oopsies, and switch, but they decide, particularly because Elijah, who's our main guy, wants to have a summer of like being a normal person, and he also recognizes that like our main girl, Jessica, could really use this opportunity in a way that will make a huge difference in her life. And so he convinces her to go for it, even though she's like very nervous about all of it. And what follows is them like rocking it in their own ways, in their own positions that they weren't necessarily supposed to be in for the summer, and obviously in the midst of it all falling in love. It was such a cute story. It was so much fun. I love hijinks like this in a YA book, and I love like soft love, and I love boys being able to be themselves and meeting girls who are able to bring that out in them and give them the confidence to do that. So it was just such a lovely book, and I'm definitely going to be reading more Susan Lee in the future. I know she has one other book out already. That was her debut, called Soulmates, and I'm not sure if she has any more coming out soon, but I sure hope so because I want to read everything she's written. All right, day 2 of catching up on my book blanket. This is where we are at right now. I did 3 books and I've got 3 books left to do, so let's dive into those. The next book that I finished was The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston, which is a contemporary romance. So it's going to be getting the baby pink color, and it was 336 pages, which means it will be getting 2 rows. So 7 Year Slip is the second book by Ashley Poston that I've ever read. I read The Dead Romantics back when I was really still just getting into reading, and I remember reading it in like 24 hours and it just having me bawling at the end. So I honestly can't believe it took me this long to pick up another book by her, but I will say it was definitely worth the wait because this book was just another one that had me in my freaking feels. Gosh, it was just one of those books that grabs you and doesn't let you go. So the 7-year slip follows Clementine, who has just moved into her aunt's old apartment. She was really, really close with her aunt for like all of her life, and they used to go on adventures together. They would go on like a trip every single year, and her aunt was just like this quirky, eclectic globetrotter who never could be tied down. And her aunt had also always told her that the apartment was magical because when you least expected it, it would slip 7 years into the future or 7 years into the past. Her aunt had also told her about a woman that she had fallen in love with who lived in the apartment 7 years before she did. And so one of like the main rules of living in the apartment is don't fall in love, because by the time that her aunt found the woman that she fell in love with again, she was just a different person. So of course, this book follows Clementine as she falls in love in the apartment. She comes home one day from work and there's a man in the apartment, and she's like, "What the heck are you doing here?" And he's like, well, your aunt is subletting the place to me for the summer. It turns out she's subletting the place to him while she's on one of those yearly vacations with Clementine. And they have like a really magical evening together, but just as they're about to kiss, Clementine is like, no, I can't do this. And then after that evening, she doesn't run into him again in the apartment for a long time. She's like, okay, this was just a one-time thing. Obviously, this man was perfect, but such is life. And of course, the next thing that happens is that he turns up at her work. She is a book publicist, and he is their newest author. He's a chef, so he's doing like a cookbook. And the rest of the book is them sort of both in the apartment 7 years in the past, because he does come back to the apartment 7 years in the past, but also in the present. And it's like who people are as time changes. It's about timing, and it's about the power of good food and good company. And it's just an absolutely charming book. It is emotional. It will hit you right in the feels, and I am just definitely a huge Ashley Poston fan now. I need to read a novel love story, I think is her third book. I need to read that ASAP. And I'm really excited because she's going to be at Love Y'all Festival this year, so I will get my books signed. I think she's doing a keynote, so it's just going to be a good time. All right, that's those rows down, and we're going to be sticking with the baby pink for our next rows because I read another contemporary romance, which was My Best Friend's Honeymoon by Meryl Wilsner, and it was 320 pages, so it's going to be getting another 2 rows. So I was simultaneously super excited and also very nervous to get an e-arc of this book because I am nothing if not Mistakes Were Made's biggest fan. But then when I read Cleat Cute last year, I was really disappointed. I kind of hated it. I just hated how much miscommunication there was in the book. So of the 2 books of Meryl Wilsner's that I've read, one was really amazing and the other one was really disappointing. And I am glad to report that My Best Friend's Honeymoon put Meryl Wilsner squarely back into favorite author category, because this one was so freaking good. And I didn't think it was possible, but it is even spicier than Mistakes Were Made. So that was a good time. So My Best Friend's Honeymoon follows our 2 main characters, Elsie and Ginny. Elsie is sort of like a bubbly, chaotic blonde who works at her family's hardware store, and then Ginny is her like lifelong best friend who has been in love with her for forever. And the book opens with Elsie's fiance taking Ginny to like go see a surprise that he has planned for Elsie, and it turns out that he has planned their entire wedding as a surprise, and it's happening next Saturday. And so Ginny's like, okay, you have fun with that. And obviously when Elsie finds out about this, she's like, I don't know about this, because of course the reason she's been procrastinating on planning her wedding is because she wasn't even really sure if she wanted to get married in the first place. So they break up, and then her ex-fiance is like, you know what, the honeymoon's already booked and paid for. I would just be sad going on it, so you should go and take Ginny. And so she does. And she and Ginny go on this luxurious tropical vacation together. Now, Ginny has obviously been in love with Elsie since forever, but Elsie has also sort of secretly harbored some sort of longing for Ginny this whole time. It's kind of one of those moments where she's like, you know, like everybody kind of thinks about their best friend like this. Right? Like, but it's not a big deal. Elsie is also a huge people pleaser, and so when they're at the island, one of the things that Ginny tells her is like, this vacation is going to be about you, and whatever you want, you get. And so one morning, Elsie wakes up and she's like, you know what I want is you to fuck me. And so that is what starts what can only be described as a fuckfest. And there is some good times that are had. There were some moments that had me feeling real speechless. And the rest of the book is them like figuring out, okay, like what do we do now? Obviously we have insane chemistry, we have feelings for each other, we're like best friends. So where do we go from here? And there's drama, there's growth as human beings, all of that good stuff. And I think another bonus of this book is that this is Meryl Wilsner's first non-binary character, and Meryl is non-binary as well. And Ginny is both non-binary and fat, but also just like a absolute hottie and like very confident in themselves. And so I really loved seeing that. It was just a really nice piece of representation and of the book, and I really hope to see more non-binary characters from Meryl and more like non-binary characters in lesbian romance in general, more butch characters in lesbian romance. I'm always a fan of that, so I would say this is definitely a book that you should pick up. I'm going to be getting a physical copy of it as soon as I can, and yeah. Alright, done with that, and now we are on to the final out of the 6 books that I was catching up on my blanket, and that one is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved Human, which is a fantasy book, so it's going in gold, and it is 336 pages, so it will be getting 2 rows. That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human is the 3rd book in Kimberly Lemming's Mead Mishap series, which is like the most adorable, fun, funny, silly romantasy series out there. I have loved every single book that I've read of it, and I think each book gets better as the series goes on. So this one was easily my new favorite out of the 3. What I love about these books is just how little they take themselves seriously. It's just so much fun, and Kimberly Lemming herself is also just like the funnest human being on earth. I met her at Love Y'all Fest last year, and she's just a great time to be around. If you ever have the opportunity to meet her or like go to a panel that she's on, do it. You will not regret it. So That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human, I think the original title before the books got traditionally published, right before this one was supposed to come out, was That Time I Got Drunk and Drugged a Dragon, but probably obvious reasons why the title got changed, but that should kind of tell you what the main premise of our story is. So our main FMC in this book is Cherry, who is Cinnamon's cousin. Cinnamon was the main character in the first book, and she is trapped in a tower. She was like kidnapped by a different dragon and has been trapped in the tower for the last 5 years. And one day, this other dragon shifter named Dante comes along, and she's obviously very suspicious of him, so she drugs him to like take advantage of the fact that he's offering to take her away. He gets very loopy and silly, like this guy is when there is yarn to be gnawed on. And we say, no, we don't do that. No, we do not. But another reason that this man is loopy and silly is that he notices immediately that Cherry is his fated mate. So he takes her away from her tower prison to his own castle, and she's like, whoa, this is amazing. But obviously she still doesn't trust him, and she wants to get home. And so we kind of follow them as she learns to trust him, and they fall in love, and she does make it home, and they have a happily ever after. And this book, like the other 2 books in the series, is just like so much freaking fun. I laughed and had just the best time. This was the first of these books that I read on audio. I read the other 2 books in ebook form, and I did quite like the narrator for the audiobook. She had a southern accent, which I think I knew it like in the back of my mind that these characters were supposed to have southern accents, but it didn't really hit home until this one. That I think just makes it like the cherry on top for feeling even more cozy. But yeah, it was a good time. I would recommend the audiobook if audiobooks are your thing. All right, so this is where we're sitting at now, and I did finish 2 more books in the last 2 days of January, so I'm going to do those rows now, and then we'll wrap it up for the month. So the second to last book that I finished in January was Brewed with Love by Shelly Page. This was a YA fantasy romance type book, so it's going to be in this pretty in pink color, and it was 336 pages, so it'll be getting 2 rows. So the best and only way I've really found so far to explain the vibes of Brewed with Love is that it is very much giving early 2010s CW show, so like when I was in high school. It is so much so in the tradition of like Teen Wolf and The Vampire Diaries in what I feel is the best way possible. Brewed with Love follows our main character, Sage, who is a plant witch, and she lives with her grandmother and her grandmother's wife. Don't get any backstory on the grandma and her wife, which I would have loved to get, but you know, you love to see some old gays. And so she works at her grandmother's apothecary, where they sell different tonics so they can like help you with skincare or hair or like just feeling a little less anxious, stuff like that. And Sage is working sort of on her own on a heartbreak tonic that will make you feel less heartbroken, because she like went through a bad sort of ghosting when she was in middle school and is still all worked up about it in a way that like you only can be when you're young. And the plot twist, of course, is that the girl who ghosted her back in middle school has now moved back to town and gotten a job at the apothecary. And so we've got like some forced proximity going on. And early on in the book, there is a break-in at the apothecary, and they steal some like regular tonics, but they also steal the most recent version of the heartbreak tonic that Sage was working on. But because it was not a successful version of the tonic, like it didn't work, it has some pretty bad side effects on the person who accidentally ends up ingesting it. And so while the police and their coven are both conducting their own separate investigations, Sage and her love interest Jimena are like deciding to take on the task of investigating it on their own, because of course, in true CW show fashion, the adults are useless and the high schoolers must save the world. So through the course of their investigation, obviously their like chemistry is still there, and we find out like why Jimena had to move away and ghost Sage, and like they kind of repair their relationship. Obviously they find who stole the tonic, and it's just a good, fun, silly time. I thought it was a good time. I think it's a really good YA book, so I would definitely recommend it if you are in the mood for a good, fun, silly time, or if you know someone who is younger and might be interested in a book like this. Alright, so we're done with those rows, and we just have one more book to crochet for the month of January. And that book is Grand Slam Romance, which is a graphic novel. So I'm finally getting to introduce another new color to my blanket. It is this absolutely gorgeous lavender color. So I'm really excited to see how it looks against the rest of the blanket so far. And the book itself was 240 pages, so I'm going to be doing 2 rows in this color. Let's chat a little bit about it. So Grand Slam Romance was written by a pair of wives, which is just so freaking cute. And it follows basically 2 main characters. The first one is Mickey Monsoon, and the other one is Astra Maxima, but we mostly kind of see things through the POV of Mickey Monsoon. And this is like a softball slash magical graphic novel. So we start out and Mickey Monsoon is like on this kind of like ragtag softball team, and they are going up against their like rivals. And it turns out there's a new catcher on their rival team, and it is someone that Mickey knows from their childhood. So drama. And this catcher is named Astra, and she's also like a magical girl, which basically means that she has like extra powers and is super good at softball. And they lose to their rivals, and Mickey's like, I'm gonna quit softball. But then they get recruited to be on this extra special team full of aces, and the sole goal is to like bring down Astra. And so kind of from there we get into chaos. This was like a super fun graphic novel. It's doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's full of just like chaos queers, which we love to see. And I really loved the art style as well. It was super fun, super quick read, and yeah, I had a good time with it. And with that, I am done with all of the books for January. I am so excited with how this is starting to look like, and I cannot wait to see what it looks like at the end of the year. So be sure to keep following along and tune back in at the end of February for another reading and crochet vlog.